You have to click the go live button to go, hey, we're live. Hey, everybody.
There we are.
It's Friday. It's the CUI Hotline. It's our weekly CMMC Q&A live stream coming at you live from snowed in Huntsville, Alabama, apparently.
It's 5.5 inches over here, guys. It is wild.
That's a lot of snow for Northern Alabama.
It is
For
a
those of you
lot
who
of
don't
snow.
know, that's a lot. So yeah, it's Friday. We're back. We're here every week. Tons of questions came in over DMs. Lots of questions came in over the hotline. Just to let you know, if you go to cuihotline.org, you don't have to call the number, although it's great to hear everybody's voices. You can just submit the question via the form, and we will include it in the live stream as they come in, which we've got several today. So just so you know, you can always do that. All righty. We have a bunch of questions, so we'll just do some quick housekeeping here. Just so everybody knows, CS2 Reston is coming up in May. If you use the code Hotline Reston, you get 15% off of your registration. I think everybody might be interested. I'm planning on talking about, I don't really know what the title is. The working title in my mind is the Assessment Guide Reduction Project or something along those lines. So if you dig through 171, 172, the CMMC Assessment Guide, there is a lot of repetitive and duplicative stuff in the assessment guide that without changing the requirements, without changing how they're worded, we could reduce the overall length of that document. I think my current theory, based off my current analysis, by 30 to 50% in terms of the total length of the document with just some better technical writing. So I'm pretty sure that that's around the neighborhood of how much we can shorten the document without actually changing the substance of the requirements at all. So we're going to talk about that at CS2 Reston, and hopefully that will help make things very clear for people who are trying to navigate through the requirements and everything. So I think it should be very interesting.
That's awesome. Come join us, guys.
Yeah, it's always a great time. Always a great time. Just to let everybody know, just like last week, CUI Hotline, all this content is now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Spotify has a video. They've got all the stuff. You can get the Sum It Up podcast over there as well. So you find on YouTube, LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple, the back of a Buick, behind a 7-Eleven. We're everywhere. You can find us everywhere. All righty. What's going on this week, Daniel? What's on your mind?
Yeah, so weekend review. So this week I've had quite a few conversations with construction industry and architectural and engineering companies. Really, the summary of it is like they understand regulation. And it's fascinating to talk to them, who's, partially in the defense space, versus a tried and true manufacturer or regulated research that spends a lot of their money and effort in the defense space, right? Because they understand building codes. They understand that you have to get third-party assessed, like all of those concepts of having to go through a certification because what you're doing is very sensitive in nature, whether it's having a building built and you don't want anyone to die in it, right? Or, in this case, protecting CUI. But one of the fascinating things about it is they're already getting buttoned up themselves. They're pretty well ahead of the curve. I think something along like 30% of our managed clients are construction and architectural engineering companies, which is a huge percentage, right?
Yeah.
But their supply chain, having conversations with them. So a couple of weeks ago when Jacob was out playing golf, that was fun for you, Jacob.
Yeah, I'll tell you guys a story about Torrey Pines at the end.
Oh, I'm very excited about that. Scott and I did the Q&A, and we mentioned our supply chain program that's coming out. And so a construction company was the first one that took a bite, sent me an email after the Q&A and said, hey, we need to do this. And so I had that call with them yesterday, and it's just amazing how in tune they are to the requirements, and especially how in tune they are to being able to de-scope CUI to their suppliers.
Wow.
Better than any manufacturer I've seen.
That's really interesting.
It's very fascinating because they just understand a lot better. Ryan Bonner was also on the call, so he threw out some fun geospatial fun words to us that I've never heard before, about coordinates and building plans and all that good stuff. But yeah, anyways, all that to say is if you're in the construction space, architectural engineering space, hats off to you, at least those that have been early adopters, because you are actually embracing this with the same kind of understanding that you do your actual profession. So anyways, that's just a shout out to that industry. If you are interested in the supply chain program, please reach out to me, LinkedIn DM. if you want us to help work with you to figure out what kind of CUI you have, and then how big your supply chain is going to be impacted, and then do some education to your supply chain as well. So
Yeah,
that's the end of my pitch here.
We've talked about it before. Those construction contracts are huge, really, really huge. And I remember this would have been maybe 4 or 5 years ago when there was a big earthquake out in China Lake here in California, and there's a bunch of like advanced weapon systems, energy systems, bunch of spooky high speed stuff that they work on out there, and it just like destroyed the buildings and the runways and like all the infrastructure. And so there was a huge event out there where it was just construction companies sort of having a get together essentially on like what the contracts were going to look like for repairing China Lake. And I mean, some of the numbers that were getting thrown out were really big, really big. So it's always very interesting. One of the companies we talked to this week in the construction industry, it was fascinating because they were saying that they had passed their JSVA. When was it?
So I saw the letter from their C3PAO, and it was I want to say it was the week after the proposed rule was dropped. I was like, you guys have to have been the first joint surveillance client. Period.
I mean, they got to be up there. I mean, that has to be one of the earliest joint surveillance assessments of any company in any sector.
It was fascinating. I mean, I was like, hats off to you guys, not only in your industry, but also just overall. Like, I mean, it was
we got to ask them. We got to ask them to ask DibCAC, or we need to reach out to DibCAC or somebody, because it would be crazy to know what was the name of the first company.
What industry was the
first company to get it, and if it was construction and not manufacturing. I mean, if you would have asked me all along if it was a manufacturer or construction company or somebody else, I would have been like, it's a manufacturer for sure.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting trend that we're seeing for sure.
So shout out to that company. They are a watcher of our Q&A every week. So you know who you are, and we're excited to continue to work with y'all, and congrats on your now converted CMMC certification. Now, the bummer about them, there are some pains to being an early adopter, because if you look at the rule, it's 3 years from the date of the assessment. So this was in 2023. So they don't really have a lot of extra time given to them. But
I mean, they're that early. I mean, they're doing this stuff in their sleep. So, so good for them. Absolutely. All righty, let's see here. Okay, NIST SP 800-172 revision 3 initial draft came out before the holidays. NIST has extended the public comment period until January 17th. So you have until next Friday, for if you're listening to this, to submit your comments to NIST on the initial draft. And you can just Google the initial draft of 172 Rev 3, and they'll have their page. You can submit your comments there. You can email them. They always post their public comments. 172 is the set of requirements that is evaluated by CMMC level 3. So if you are a company that anticipates that you will need or want CMMC level 3 in the future, you currently have to deal with the first version of NIST SP 800-172, but this will affect you in the future under what you might consider CMMC 3.0. So when the rulemaking updates for CMMC happen to update 171 to Rev 3 and 172 to Rev 3 and whatever other changes they're going to make, that's probably going to happen in a matter of, I would say, 2 to 3 years might be, when you're looking at, we don't know the exact sort of time here. It's going to be a while, but just be aware of what the road ahead looks like in terms of changes. We're going to have a podcast on some of the high level takeaways next Thursday. But if you haven't taken a look at it yet, because it was through the holidays, they have an extension of an extra week. Those comments are due. I have my initial thoughts that primarily revolve around the formatting decisions that they've made in the document. I think it makes sense if the two documents are completely independent of each other, but since they're supposed to work together, literally 172 is supposed to enhance 171. I think the style of control IDs that they selected, because they don't match one for one, makes it more confusing than it needs to be. So hopefully they change it. We're going to talk about it on the podcast, but just so you know, you have to have your comments in by the 17th. Alrighty.
Time for some questions.
Any guidelines and recommendations for remote users that need to handle PII, personally identifiable information? This is a multi-part question. Okay.
Okay.
Any guidelines and recommendations for remote users that need to handle PII? Is PII controlled unclassified information? Is PII CUI? Sorry for the acronyms.
CUI.
Does CUI always have to be on its own VLAN? And so I would assume by extension, does the PII need to be on its own VLAN as well?
Okay, so this one actually came in over the holiday break, maybe the snowstorm. In your case, you have an ash storm over there, Jacob.
Yeah, we got a literal firestorm.
Stay safe from the fire over there.
Yeah.
So first off, there isn't just a general PII category. It's all under privacy. Jacob, you and I were talking about this before the live stream start. So I pulled up a couple of references. So the first one up here is personnel records, right? And so it has, a bunch of different stuff, safeguarding dissemination authorities, so forth and so on. And so it's basically one of the things, in this case, it's related to the employees of federal agencies. So if you're dealing with personnel records of people, of federal people, then yes, those things are going to be in scope as CUI. Now, one small caveat to this, and then we'll get to the VLAN conversation, because as you explore down, and I had this question for our good friend Ryan Bonner not too long ago, there's a category inside of NARA called sensitive personally identifiable information. Right. And this is basic stuff, birth date, SSN, like all of the things that you would consider traditional PII. So if you scroll down just a little bit here and you look at the Safeguarding or Dissemination Authority down here.
The most important part of the registry, by the way.
It's what makes the thing CUI, right?
Not
it being in the registry does not make it CUI. And this is where it's a false start by NARA, in my opinion. Because if you look at this, dated December 4th, 2017, in the letter they dated, this is 2018 up here, DHS wanted to submit this new category. Now, if you look right here, this approval letter in and of itself is not an authority pursuant to law, regulation, or government-wide policy for safeguarding and dissemination controls. So what this tells me is this sensitive PII category should not actually be in the registry. Because there is no.
At least needs to be a different color on the page.
Something.
Yeah.
Something.
Make it blue or yellow or some other color.
Yeah, because it's like, come on, guys. Like, what are we even doing here? Like, you're already confusing enough. Now you're putting in placeholders for potentially future CUI, which is really what this is.
Yep.
So I say all this to say, like, the CUI registry is great in a little bit. But there are things that you just really need to look at those safeguarding and dissemination because it might not actually be either A, applicable to you, or B, not applicable to anybody yet, which is what this is telling us.
And this is exactly the same situation for system vulnerability information. The authority for the category of system vulnerability information, when you look at the summary at the top, it makes it sound like any security relevant information is CUI. And if you actually, this category description up here, related to information that if not protected could result in adverse effects to information systems. That sounds like anything. That sounds like security protection data. But if you scroll, that is not an authority. That's NARA's attempt to summarize the authority. And if you actually dig into some of these, which they can be very dense, because they're usually just PDF scans, they're talking about federal
title of this one.
Federal information system vulnerability information, not information on contractor information systems. Now, should that information be CUI? Should SPD be CUI? There's a case that you can make for that, but there isn't an authority that makes it CUI. This was one of the things that we were watching with the CMMC final rule, the 32 CFR rule, because all you have to have for something to be a category of CUI is a law, regulation, or government-wide policy. So if the 32 CFR CMMC regulation says protect this data, then that's what you need for it to be CUI basic. But so you have this like snake eating its tail kind of thing where you have to protect it under CMMC, and CMMC is the thing that told you to protect it in the first place. Now they backed off of straight up saying that security protection data is CUI. And so if you hear somebody say, hey, this data is CUI, you can always go back, as we've talked with Ryan Bonner multiple times on the podcast at CS2, which authority, where in the authorities does it say that this is a category of CUI? So PII by itself is just an umbrella term. Now, there are examples like you had, health information, things like that, that people would generally refer to as PII. but from an authority basis at the bottom of the pages, not always the same thing.
Well, and if you look at these privacy records at a broad stroke, most of this is referring to federal employees. This is not talking about your employee records, right? So one big distinction here with PII is you're a commercial private organization. Like, you are keeping that data in your HR systems. That is not CUI. Right. Now, if you're storing it, processing, storing, or transmitting these types of records on behalf of a federal agency or federal employees, that's when that drift starts coming into it being CUI, right? I've brought up this before, but there's another category here. We'll get into the VLAN conversation in just a second. But this is just funny to me. So there's a budget section here, and people are like,
budgets are CUI. My budgets are
CUI, right? And you look at here again. Category description is the first place to start. Federal budget, right? And so again, you just kind of go down here, because if you get in this CUI, and this is the OMB document that's like 1,000 pages.
Thanks for hot linking to that, Nara. Not an 800-page OMB document.
It's just like, come on, guys. But I say all this to say, and we had this conversation yesterday with the construction company, there are very kind of few things that are probably applicable to you guys. And most of them probably fall under CTI and export control in the defense space, right? And other agencies might have more fine-tuned, DOE might have some unique stuff compared to DOD, but, DFARS 7012 says, hey, anything in this registry, treat it as CUI, which makes sense.
DOD stuff is unique in this landscape of CUI categories, because so much of it is derived or created by the contractor, whereas a lot of these other categories are just things that wholesale would be sent out from the government to data processors in their supply chain, right? The DoD space is very different, because they send you CUI and then there's CUI derived from it, or they tell you to do something and you're creating it pursuant. You're not creating birthdays, right? You're not engineering birthdays with some of this PII information. So the DoD space is a lot murkier than some of these others that are a lot more clear cut.
Very true. But all that to say, so let's say you are having PII on behalf of federal employees, right? And that is CUI to you. VLAN conversation is kind of an interesting conversation, right? Because you can do what they call logical separation, right? You don't have to have a whole physical switch and firewall and all of that. You can do logical separation, assuming that the data flow itself, anything processing, storing, or transmitting CUI, is meeting the NIST standard 171, DFARS 7012, CMMC level 2 requirements, right? So long story short, yes, you can segment that and have it on your assets if they're part of your compliance boundary, right? And as long as there's no contractual obligation that you have to store that data on federal systems, right? Because if you have to store it on federal systems, it's not part of your CUI boundary, right? It would be considered like a specialized asset if you actually have the government equipment. But overall, yes, you can do logical separation. All those systems have to meet the same requirements for CUI. But if it's on a federal asset on their network, right, you leave it where it is. It's not part of your boundary. If it's a federal asset, government asset that you are in possession of, it falls under the requirements of a specialized asset, which is basically document it. Have a risk-based security policy on how you're mitigating, potential security issues, right? It's very kind of light touch, not go apply 110 controls on something that you don't own, right? So anyways, great question. Sorry for the rabbit trail, but the CUI registry is kind of mystical to a lot of people. And it turns out there's actually not a lot that's applicable to the industry itself. So I always love going off on a tangent.
Last fun fact, back when they were creating the CUI registry, there was a debate about whether or not it was going to be public at all, because it isn't even technically for public consumption. I mean, you can go find the regulations and stuff, but it's really, for the contract officers to go and it's a database to go verify, hey, yeah, this is CUI, this isn't. And
maybe we need to show the contracting officers where this is, because I don't think a lot of them know where this registry exists, right? Or the DoD CUI registry, right? It's like, maybe we need to go have a class with DoD contractors.
Yeah, absolutely. All righty, let's see here. Why is the 48 CFR rule stuck in purgatory? Is this a bad sign? A couple things. The 48 CFR CMMC rule is not stuck in purgatory. It is moving along through the rulemaking process, completely normal pace, actually, if not a faster pace based off of our analysis. So there's two different rules that implement the CMMC program. One is a 32 CFR Code of Federal Regulations regulation that establishes the overall CMMC program as a Department of Defense program. This outlines the levels, the oversight, the roles and responsibilities, the details, the POAM, all the details of how the program works are contained at Title 32 of the Code of Federal Regulations. However, to get that information into contracts for what level you need to meet, there is a different part of the Code of Federal Regulations, fun, that actually creates contract clauses, which are themselves regulations. And that is in Title 48. So we refer to these as 32 CFR and 48 CFR CMMC. 32 CFR is done. We got the final rule in October. It became effective December 16th. CMMC is now a live, real program. There are companies that are officially CMMC certified for various reasons. There are companies who are going through CMMC assessments with authorized C3 PAOs of their own volition as we speak. However, CMMC is not in any contracts as a specific requirement until the 48 CFR rule is final and effective. We got the proposed rule back at the end of 2024. And on average, these rules can take about a year or so before they go from proposed to being published as a final rule. So the earliest estimates that we've heard from the government about when that final rule will come out are March of this year. So less than 3 months from now. Our analysis of historic rulemaking patterns from the DoD suggests that it will be closer to June. So if you want a range of possible outcomes, think, the end of Q1 to end of summertime for when the 48 CFR rule is done and CMMC requirements start showing up in contracts. So the 48 CFR rule is not behind. It is not in purgatory. It is not on hold. There is nothing wrong with what's going on with the process. The system is working as it was intended, for better or worse. They are adjudicating comments and going through the process. So it is not delayed. If anything, if it's published in March or anytime before the end of summer, it would actually be ahead of schedule on average based off what they've done historically. So it is not in purgatory.
Now, what is in purgatory is the FAR CUI clause, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The FAR CUI rule, which is slightly different, is the federal-wide acquisition regulation that will require all federal contractors to implement NIST SP 800-171 requirements for all categories of CUI in the registry that they might be dealing with. The 32 CFR CMMC rule, the 48 CFR CMMC rule, and the suite of defense acquisition contract clauses like 7012, 7019, 7020, 7008, those are all applicable to the DoD and the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base. The FAR CUI rule expands this to the entire federal contracting base. We were expecting that rule back in 2016. We've talked about this multiple times in 2024. The white whale of federal acquisition regulations that one has been in purgatory for years and years and years. And we were expecting it to be published at the end of last year. It should be published any day. I don't know. I've asked everybody I know. It's going to come out when it comes out.
It's got to happen.
I have my prediction on the podcast this week as before the end of Q1 of 2025. But if you would have been like, hey, heads, you're right. Tails, you shave your beard. Is it going to come out before the end of 2025? I would have said absolutely. So yeah, the great and powerful Scott Edwards is here. What about the FAR CUI rule? Is it in purgatory? Yes. It was in purgatory, and then it got out, and it went through the system, and it got approved by OIRA, and now it's what I've heard is it's with the Office of the Federal Register, ready to be published, and somebody's asleep at their desk or whatever. I don't know. I mean, it's supposed to be literally any day.
Now, one thing, and I'm going to pull this up because we've talked about it a couple weeks in a row, but it's just fun to talk about. SAM.gov has the marketplace for the acquisition of professional services. I think this is Army, the solicitation here. And in this, sections L and M, they actually have under certifications CMMC. So DFARS 7021, which is 48 CFR. So 48 CFR allows the DoD to introduce DFARS 7021 clauses into contracts,
Yep.
which would be what this should probably be saying, but
Yes.
it's not real yet, right? So how can they say you're going to have either a CMMC certification, or they used to actually say, it might even still be in here, that you have to provide a date of your certification when you plan to have it.
Yeah, this is a good example of what this is going to look like. From everything that we know, this is a mistake, right? They jumped the gun. And we've seen this over the last couple of years where DFARS 7021, the CMMC clause, would get inserted into RFPs on accident. And people would have to contact and say, hey, take this out of the contract. It's not even supposed to be in there. So it happens. But this is what it will look like in section L&M of an RFP once it does start to roll out in contracts. Now, that being said, folks like Bob Metzger, who pay very close attention to these things as acquisition attorneys, have said that they'll probably get away with this being in the RFP because this is planned to come out in the late end of summer. And so by the time the actual solicitation goes out, it'll probably already be done. And so they'll kind of have gotten away with it. It technically shouldn't be in there. But if you want a preview of what the world is going to look like by the end of summer, especially by the end of this year, this is what it's going to look like.
And side note, it doesn't say that you can self-attest in this solicitation. So it's certification or bust. So, or your date of which you will have your CMMC assessment done. So.
Yeah, do not bank on the likelihood of being able to self-assess at level 2. So that is not a recipe for success. All righty, a couple more here. Let's see. How will CMMC show up in contracts? Okay, this is very relevant. We were just talking about how will CMMC show up in contracts by summer of 2025 if DFARS currently says it can't show up until October of 2025? All right, fun rulemaking lesson here, everybody. So if you currently look, if you Google DFARS 2522047-2021, it will take you to the current text of the CMMC clause. And you go, well, how is that possible? Because the text of the DFARS won't show up until the 48 CFR final rule is done, right? Why is there a clause already? And that's because back in 2020, when CMMC first started, the DoD issued an interim final rule that said, hey, create this clause. Hey, this is what we're doing. Bang, 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 bang. The DoD assessment methodology, we're in a big hurry. There was just a massive breach. We got to go. So they created the 7021 clause. A lot of stuff happened. They revisited the program. They did more rulemaking, and now here we are. But that clause language is on the books because that rule was done. And the original conception of the phased rollout was that it was going to start at the end of 2020 and go until October of 2025. And the DoD was going to hand select which contracts would get clauses over that rollout period. And after October of 2025, CMMC would be in all contracts from that point on. What we would call today the fourth phase of the CMMC rollout. Because they are updating DFARS 7021 and this particular section of Title 48, where DoD acquisition regulations live, with that second CMMC rule, all of this is going to be updated via that rule. So if you look at the current text of this clause, which cannot go into contracts yet, you'll say, oh, it can't go into contracts until October of 2025. That information is out of date. That is as of the 2020 rule. The phased rollout for when CMMC will start showing up in contracts via this clause happen when the upcoming final rule changes this text and says we're going to start inserting it into contracts right after the effective date of the rule. And then a year later, we're going to insert it into more contracts, and a year later, it's going to be fully effective. So that's why you'll sometimes see people go, oh, this says October, you're saying summer. Some people are saying March. What the heck is going on? It's because this information lingers until it's updated. It doesn't go away. All righty. All right. So how do I actually find out if I have CUI on my systems already? Okay, fine. They call us up. Okay. They say uncle, they've had their arm twisted, whatever, right? For whatever reason, they're finally looking at it. How do they know if they have it on their systems already, not looking at upcoming solicitations?
So there's a few things. I'm gonna reshare my screen to yet another PowerPoint slide because I feel like that's all I do these days.
Your magical PowerPoint slide is getting quite the reputation.
It is. It's been referenced on several of the calls I've been on this week, which is very flattering.
It's like the never-ending scarf trick at the circus.
So basically, like, this is, again, broad stroke here. Typically, what we see is CUI for the clients that we support, right? DoD distribution statements, ITAR EAR markings, federally funded research, not fundamental research. There's a line there. Legacy FOUO if it maps to CUI registry categories. Things marked CUI, CTI, right? General banner markings. And then things that are not consumer off the shelf, right? Or customized with consumer off the shelf parts, right? Not, customized build to spec type stuff. So when you're looking at this, and we actually have a list, and I have a list if you guys want to shoot me a direct message, what we tell people to do is the first kind of prong of this is let's figure out how much you're bleeding in the organization. So we use Microsoft commercial searches, right? So most of the clients coming or companies coming to us are not in the GovCloud yet, but you could do this in the GovCloud. We have categories defined for all of these things. And it's a large Word document that I can send you guys, and you can do searches of your existing environment in commercial, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. You can also do on-prem searches with tools like Netrix and things like that, or any kind of on-prem file management tool that you might have. And so what's great about it is this is going to expose very quickly if you have CUI or not. Now, the government is good at two things: overmarking and not marking. That's it. Like, those are the two things they're good at. You can overmark something or you can not mark it at all. So the other small caveat here is there's something called CDRL, that you need to be requesting from your prime or from the government directly if you are the prime, which is basically an outstanding technical data list, you could say, of things that will be CUI as deliverables. So the creation of that content could be CUI, and then the actual production of that could be CUI as well. So that will also help you guide the guardrails of when you're receiving a contract and you have this kind of punch down list, you could say, of known CUI things that should be coming to you. It will help you understand what actually is going to be CUI on behalf of that contract, right? And that's tip of the spear stuff. You don't really ask for that on the back end of a contract. You need to ask for that at the front end, negotiation, signing of the contract, pen on paper kind of stuff, right? So I say all that to say is, like, if you need help, if you want that list, and Jason Sprosser wrote a great blog on how to actually search Microsoft Commercial or the GovCloud to generate all of the people and SharePoint sites and mailboxes affected by this. Shoot me a message. I can shoot you both of those things. But CUI is a very broad category, but it's also a very small category all in itself. Not everything is CUI, and chances are a lot of things that you've been received are CUI and just not marked. So it's this fun, and you got to play the Christian doctrine fun role-playing game. So all that to say is, reach out to us. We'll help you at least get some good initial pulses on where CUI is in the org. And then you can figure out, can I enclave the environment, right? Do a carve out, or is it just so expansive I don't have any way to contain it? I need to bring everything in scope.
Yeah. Can we do surgery, or do we need to do chemo here? Like, how far has it spread?
Exactly.
So quick question for you. So, I mean, we have people run this, obviously we have people run this search as one of the main things that we do, and we're working with them, and you see their results come back.
I do.
What does that look like a lot of the times? Because people they really have no idea. They're like, I guess I have it. And they run these searches. And what does that look like in terms of the range of outcomes here?
Yeah. I mean, the people that come to us are IT people, are tasked with fix the problem, fix the CMMC problem, right? They're not executing these contracts. Right. Very few people we talk to are dual hatted unless they're a small business. Right. So they're just like, they're not even aware of this type of data coming into the org or being generated by the organization. Right. So when they go and do this search, they're like, oh my God. Like, I talk to very large commercial organizations. 90% of their revenue is commercial. Right. It has nothing to do with DoD and very little to do with the overall federal government. And they come back with their search results, and it has permeated everywhere. Because here's the thing, like OneDrive's deployed to a workstation. If I download something to my desktop I get from a file sharing tool like DoD Safe, OneDrive is going to back that up to the cloud if you have that enabled, right? Email, SharePoint sites, Teams, collaborating, teaming agreements, group chats, cross-tenant collaboration with another partner that you might have. You start looking at the sprawl of how this data moves in. Even a simple thing like if your iPhone's in scope and it's not managed and you have email on your phone, or you download a file to your iCloud, that's backed up via iCloud on Apple servers now. Once you start seeing the tentacles reach out, it ends up becoming it. And I don't mean to be insensitive. It ends up becoming a cancer.
Yeah.
This data goes everywhere.
Well, I mean, I'll double down on another timely metaphor. It's like embers from a wildfire spreading inside your organization. People, a Southern California native living through another massive wildfire outbreak. It's so interesting now with social media and stuff to watch people watching the news about what's happening with the wildfires. Because I grew up out here with what's going on, and those embers will spread and then kick off spot fires, and that's how these things grow so quickly. And it's just it's another perfect example. It's radioactive waste is something that Ryan Bonner says. It's cancer. It's wildfire. Like, these are pretty intense metaphors, and it's like having a water leak, right? It seeps everywhere. Fun fact about the government overmarking things. I don't know if anybody saw this on the news yesterday. So everybody in the greater Los Angeles County region is a little on edge these days, if you've been watching the news. And somebody decided yesterday, when a new fire broke out in the valley on the northwest corner of the county, to send out an emergency evacuation order to the entire county of Los Angeles, which is, 40 million people.
Oh my God.
So everyone from Long Beach to the mountains to downtown to Ontario got a message on their phone at like 2:30 in the afternoon yesterday saying evacuate immediately. And and then of course the Alert LA website crashed instantly because 40 million people clicked the link, so nobody knew what was going on. To correct the issue, they sent out another emergency alert saying, please disregard the emergency alert. So
it's like, this is either the fire or Red Dawn is happening, and North Korea has finally invaded us.
I have really bad luck with these because I was in Hawaii several years ago when the guy accidentally pressed the inbound missile alert, take shelter in the sewers immediately. That was super fun. I don't know if it's the same guy, but yeah. He's
just got a little stream deck. He's just out there just pushing buttons. He's like one off from.
Oh man!
Next track. Oh, missile alert.
Oh man, yeah, It was a good time. It's a good time. Alrighty. So speaking about crazy events in the weather, apparently a couple days ago, everybody was stuck inside in the evening from the ice storm and the snowstorms, and a thread popped off on LinkedIn, and it basically boiled to, there were a lot of hot takes, there were a lot of bad takes, there were a lot of very strong opinions that I disagree with wholeheartedly, but that's the nature of social media. And it basically came down to this. It came down to the question of, are consultants required for success in CMMC? Really, a lot of people were saying CMMC is just the NIST SP 800-171 requirements, and you must pay consultants. You must hire consultants in order to implement the requirements and be successful requirements. And that is not true. There is nowhere in the requirements that says you need to hire an external service provider, external consultants. There is nothing about this process that says that you need to hire any outside expertise whatsoever. Daniel?
I think people got confused by this when the DoD did their budget estimate for the cost burden of a CMMC assessment, not implementation. I think people saw a line item for, I think it was like 30 or 40,000. It was like internal prep time, external partner prep time, something of that nature. And I think people just read that and didn't realize like, oh, I don't have to use like an external MSP, external service provider. But a lot of people are in that boat that they do have to do that. Right. And so this is kind of the tricky part, right? It's like, you don't have to use an external service provider. The only requirement is you have to use an external assessing organization to actually perform the certification. But a lot of people are just like, have a problem with CMMC because they have to go pay somebody money. and that's just the way it is, right? It's a new burden. It's a lot of people haven't budgeted for it. I know that firsthand because I talk to them every day when they see numbers to get CMMC compliant. And so a lot of people are just like, they're just upset that they have to go pay, either hire somebody internally to do it, retask them so they're no longer a billable resource on a contract, which is also happening, or use an external third party to prepare them. And hopefully the external party they're using was validated enough to know that they're going to be able to pass, right? So it's just a lot of frustration. I get it. I get why the industry's frustrated. There's very few resources that you can hire directly into your company, and there's very few resources that you can hire even externally without some sort of backlog, right, to get you there. And so I get the frustration. I have empathy and sympathy for the industry, but I also have to say this. This is not a surprise. This has been in conversation for a long time. A lot of the live streamers here, they've been early adopters or are just now getting in, but they're still considered early, right? Which is crazy to say. But like, these requirements are not new. They're just now enforceable. And that's why, going back to my first comment, the construction industry is so fascinating because they've been regulated to this degree for a very long time, right? For what they do. We're just now entering the space of regulated, what I would really call regulated industry for manufacturers and other industries that haven't had this heavy of a touch or something like this.
Yeah, and it's always an interesting. This gets into bigger questions about the cybersecurity poverty line, industrial policy, some like really big picture debates about what ought to happen. And it's funny because over the years, as I've explored this topic with the social media hive mind, you go, okay, so people feel like they have to hire external help because they don't internally know how to do the work. Very common in all supply chains. Once you reach a certain level of size, once companies become sufficiently small, they don't have the internal expertise. So they necessarily have to rely on external expertise. So what should the purpose of the cybersecurity requirements be? Should they be there to teach you how to do cybersecurity from scratch? Should they go through and explicitly say, do this, do this, do this, do this, do not vary from this, because this is exactly what you need to do if you don't know what you're doing? And to a T, some of the people who complain the most about these issues will go, give me outcome-oriented requirements. Just tell me what the goal is and I'll figure it out. And so there's a big contradiction out there in terms of what people have issues with, and then what people say when the logical solution comes up with. The best example of this in 171, SSPs were not originally a requirement in NIST SP 800-171, and the DoD got flooded with people saying, we don't know how to document our programs. How do you want us to document our programs? What does the documentation look like? And the DoD goes, well, when we document our systems, we use system security plans and big, heavy policies. And this is what our documentation looks like because we're the bureaucracy and we love paperwork. So if you don't know what to do, we'll just make you do that. And industry was like, okay. And now everybody's like, why do I have to do an SSP? And so it's the same thing over and over again. But just to get back to this original question, you don't have to hire a consultant. You don't have to hire an MSP. You don't have to hire any external help if you don't want to. Just like I could DIY reno my kitchen, but it has to be up to code, right? Which means I could take the time to learn how to do it, but it's probably a lot more economical to have the experts do it because I don't know how. On that same thread, before we get to some of the live questions here, one of the extensions off that conversation was, okay, fine. Well, why doesn't GCC and GCC High come configured for CMMC compliance out of the box?
I love this question.
Why can't I just flip a switch? Like, everyone who needs to buy these licenses has to comply with these requirements. So why is there a gap that would necessitate me needing to hire consultants and paying all this money for them to do this work? Why not just have it done already?
So NIST, ODPs is kind of a newer evolving thing in NIST 800-171, organizationally defined parameters, right? And so what that means is like an agency could very well say, I want your screen time out to be 5 minutes, right? DHS could say 5 minutes, DOD 5 minutes, right? And this is NIST 800-171 Rev 3, which is not applicable to CMMC level 2, right? But they're introducing this concept of ODPs, which is what people have supposedly been begging for. Tell me the configuration. The reason that Microsoft or AWS or Google or any of these providers don't give you a pre-configured tenant is because there's 1,000 different ways you could configure it to meet the requirements, right? The parameters and the variables are there for your organization to set on what works for your organization, right? The only, like, some of the small things are like, you have to have continuous scanning of external sources, right? When they're coming in for like file and data, like USB or a spam filter, for example, right? There are only very small things that like kind of dictate the parameters at which you have to like review documentation, right? You have to review logs, things like that. You get to set the rules of engagement there. And so Microsoft's not going to say, hey, small business, we're going to set all of these things and they're requirements that you can't meet because you don't have the manpower internally to do it. Microsoft doesn't know your staffing situation, your technical competency. They're not going to configure, the Cadillac with a stick shift and you don't even know how to drive stick, right? I mean, that's kind of the rub here is like, because there are no variables defined for every single control, the providers are not going to configure this tenant for you proactively because, again, there's so many variations that you can do. So that's why they don't configure it out of the box. It's not because they don't want to be helpful. It's because they are actually making it easier for you to be able to make those decisions on what works for your company, which is kind of honest.
And the note on that, right? We have 1,000 companies in our portfolio. That's just a lot, but they're all generally very similar companies in terms of their construction, their manufacturing. They're all DoD contractors.
Yep.
And we do a very similar kind of work for all of them. And even in that very narrow example of the total cross section of companies that could be in those environments, their configuration settings are not even the same company to company. So the idea that you're going to flip a switch is just, it's just not how it works in practice. And so if you don't,
I wish it did, by the way.
We could sell them faster.
Oh yeah, it'd be fantastic, right? Like if we could have a pre-configured, you buy 5 licenses, you get a configured gov tenant with all your policies, that would be fantastic. It's just not ever going to happen.
Yeah. And fun fact about ODPs, organizationally defined parameters, being a new thing in 171 Rev 3, this gets back to the same idea. NIST has these control mad libs, if you will, these open-ended variables for exactly the same reason why Microsoft and AWS and Google don't have pre-configured requirements, because there were so many permutations in federal and non-federal environments of how to use these controls to define these specific values, that when they went to define the specific values, everybody said, no, leave that blank because our situation is different. And so this is actually the original version of NIST SP 853 from 20 years ago. And they have ODPs in them. So this idea of variables in your controls is one of the original ideas in NIST controls to have flexibility. It always gets to me when people go, NIST controls are so prescriptive. And you're like, they're the literal opposite of prescriptive. Yeah. They don't tell you to do anything.
Well, and to help people on the call, you might be saying, Daniel, I don't even know where to start with what I should be putting in for these variables, these parameters, right? 2 good resources is, and these are a little bit more on the extreme side, so be aware of that. FedRAMP has a lot of these defined variables, and then DISA STIGs.
Yep.
DISA STIGs have a lot of these defined variables that you can deploy via group policies. They have Intune policies. They have SQL and application-specific STIGs. Again, some of those are more of the nuclear extreme option.
The JSIG also has defined ODPs. Another example of this information's free and online. You can DIY this yourself if you want to. They're there for free, but you're probably not going to just from a time trade-off perspective. In CMMC 3.0 coming up in the future, they will define the ODP values in Rev 3 for 171 and 172 in the upcoming rulemaking. So they actually will define those in the future, which is going to be very.
They're not going to leave that to the agency to do. NIST itself is going to define them.
No, DoD is going to define them for what they want. Yeah, DoD is going to define them. Now, who knows what the FARS CUI rule is going to do? But yeah, the DoD is going to define those in the future. Okay, last element here, and then we'll get to some. Okay. We'll get to some stuff in chat and some of the calls that came in. So, okay, you got to do this configuration migration. How long does the migration take? Can I just flip a switch? This is the flip the switch question that comes in all the time. Like, why does it take time? Why does it cost money?
Good question. So migrations in the Microsoft ecosystem, really any ecosystem, right? On-prem Exchange, if you're coming from Google to Microsoft, whatever that might be, you're going into a new instance, a gov instance of Microsoft, right? Even tenant to tenant migrations, commercial to gov, is a completely different platform internally to Microsoft, right? Same capabilities, just different platform. So the reason it takes so long is Microsoft has throttling involved, which throttles somewhere between 200 to 400 gigs a day, somewhere in that range. And they can't uncap that, right? So they can't just even if you're a large enterprise, they just can't uncap that. We've been working with a 60,000 person company and running it up to the highest levels of Microsoft, saying, please uncap, because we're talking like petabytes of data. And Microsoft's like, yeah, we can't do that, right? Because it would
not until they build their nuclear reactors, right? For their data centers.
That's right.
Yeah. So, again, a thing that's outside of CMMC's control entirely.
Yeah. So a lot of the people rushing to get their whole company moved in, not just an enclave, because most enclaves are greenfield or new build, right? Most people trying to get quickly into their whole company being compliant. A lot of the bottleneck comes around the migration, right? Because of throttling and things that take place. And so I say all that to say is it costs, anywhere from, 10, 15, 20 plus thousand, depending on how much data you have, all the way up the chain. And we've had migrations that have been in excess of $1 million because of the complexities of the third-party integrations and Power Platform and reconfiguring of all of those things. So the costs really do vary. It's based on data and complexity and third-party integrations. And you can't just flip a switch because it's a completely different data center. And then you add on Microsoft has throttling that we can't control. And apparently Microsoft is choosing to not control and keep it between that 200 to 400 gig a day limit there. So, and then you have to schedule cutovers. Most cutovers people want to happen over a weekend. There's only so many weekends in a month.
Yeah.
And so the other main kind of linchpin there is, resource availability to make sure that we're not conflicting with any internal deadlines for you guys. And then our staffing being able to schedule that cutover as well. So, but yeah.
Absolutely.
We'll get to the actual some live Q&A for the last 5 minutes or so here.
Yeah. We got stuff that came in the queue. We're not gonna be able to get to everything in chat, so we'll queue them up for next week as well. There was one that came in, a couple that came in very quickly with Evan Bradley. The meeting wallpaper background is very Blade Runner-esque. Wanted to highlight this very quickly to set you guys up for a nice YouTube rabbit hole to go down over the weekend. Did you know the Blade Runner universe and the Alien universe are the same universe that occur at the same time? Look it up. Look it up. The more you know. All right.
Thanks, Scott.
Mike said, I'm interested in the CUI search tool. Let me know what is the next step.
Yep. Just shoot me a LinkedIn message and with your email address, and I'll shoot it over to you.
Awesome. Okay, let's see here. We got a couple minutes left. Producer Dustin told us that we had a call that came in on the hotline, which is always fun, but we weren't allowed to listen to it ahead of time. So let's see what this says.
Yes. Hi. I was given this number by my boss to call, and I don't know if maybe y'all got the answer for me. My company moved all our data into the clouds, and I don't really know much about how all this works, but I'm looking at the weather this weekend. I'm looking at all this snow coming in, and I just want to make sure that my data ain't going to be froze over, because I'm going to probably need to do some email and stuff over the weekend. So, yeah, I don't know. Hopefully some of you smart fellows over there can help me out. I just want to make sure I'll be able to get to my emails this weekend with all the freezing clouds out there. So y'all give me a call back. Thanks. Bye.
Easily the
Hall of Fame
we've had yet.
Hall of Fame call.
I love the troll.
All right. So you're one of the smart fellers over here, Daniel. Is there a
I don't think he's going to have a problem. I think data is nice and warm in a data center. Well, warm enough and cool enough all at the same time. So I think you will be okay. Feel free to keep sending emails. It ain't going to go down anytime soon.
Yes. Now, thing to consider, if you've moved all of your CUI into the cloud, you do have FedRAMP considerations, which is its own weather pattern, or can be. There's a lot of things to consider there. So check out some of the videos that we've done. Check out some of the blogs that we've done. If you have other questions, feel free to call back.
Please do.
With what's going on. But yeah, if you've taken your CUI and you've put it in the cloud, you don't just have NIST SP 800-171 requirements. You have FedRAMP requirements, and that is a whole other can of worms. We're almost out of time for this week.
Requirements in FedRAMP, but I would assume they keep those buildings pretty closed up. So
absolutely. All right, Alfred had the link to the blog post from Jason, so thank you very much for linking to
Alfred.
that.
Appreciate that.
Let's see. David said, "Are the CMMC AB town halls no longer a thing?" No, they still do them every month. They didn't do one in December, I think, because of the holiday. And typically, like end of the year, they're doing their Seek East big conference, and there's the holidays.
Well, they had to get the cap out too. So I mean,
yeah, the cap came out, the rule came out, but the town halls, as far as I know, are always going to be a thing indefinitely. Let's see here. We had one other call that came in that we can try to get to, and
I don't know if I have. Is it the long one?
Ooh, yeah, this is actually pretty long. Maybe we're gonna park that one for next week.
Yeah, it's a really good one, but yeah.
We're gonna park that one for next week. All right, let's see here. Has DoD published anything about reciprocity for leveraging DoD Impact Level 4+ systems and assessments in CMMC assessment if the system is in boundary? Formally, I do not know of them publishing anything that says if you are using an Impact Level 4 system that you are 1-for-1 good to go. Logically, you should be fine because the requirements are going to subsume a lot of what's in 171, but it's not a 1-for-1 trade. You still have work to do in order to port that stuff over for your requirements, depending on scoping, depending on which controls, depending on what's going on. But there is no official policy guidance from the DoD saying if you use this, you're good for this, and vice versa. Just like there is no 1-for-1 reciprocity from like a FedRAMP environment, which would subsume all the requirements. So one note on that: Microsoft Gov High Cloud is rated as an Impact Level 4 environment. However, you still have to do configuration in it, correct, right? So now, if you're using DoD systems, like actual DoD agency systems, there is a potential world where those are specialized assets for you. As government technology, government equipment, potentially. But yeah, like Jacob said, zero reciprocity currently hanging out there. Yeah.
No bullet notes here.
Alrighty. Hearing all the chatter with regard to C3PAO schedules already out to August, what should the landscape look like for those that have their level 2 enclaves ready but are waiting assessment?
I love it. So if you already have what Fernando calls your reservation, right? And if you need a list of good C3PAOs, another thing, you can shoot me an email. We've got a list of partners that we partner with. If you're curious on getting kind of backlogs and reservations there. But keep all of your records up to date, right? Make sure that whatever your SSP is saying, from the consistency of what you're doing, log reviews and maintenance requests and change control, all of those things are happening. Keep running and maintaining that environment, because a C3PO is going to want to see at least 30 days past of logs. So if you're in August for your assessment, they're going to want to see July at the minimum, right? And they might want to see further past there. So all that to say is just keep running and maintaining it based on your documentation. If you haven't finished your documentation, make sure that that's done. And my recommendation, if at all possible, if there's anything that you desire to bring in scope prior to your assessment, go ahead and do that now, because if you ever extend your network or do a merger or acquisition later, you're going to trigger a new CMMC certification, right? That's kind of in the scoping guidance. So kind of survey your users, especially if you're in an enclave. Hey, if we actually win some of these contracts, what other systems have to be in scope to perform the work? Because you might have to go do another cert after you've extended your boundary. So do some extra due diligence there, and then just keep running and maintaining based on your documentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty, well, I guess everybody's back from holiday break, because we had tons of questions in chat we couldn't get to. We had tons of questions on the forum. We had calls that came in that we couldn't get to. So we will queue those up for next week, and then we will start off where we left off.
Hey,
and we'll go from there.
Roll Tide, Michael Benson. I got to throw that in there. Michael Benson threw me a Roll Tide. So it's 5.5 inches of snow. So I'm rolling, that's for sure.
Man, yeah, that's yeah, what a great call. That's a Hall of Fame call right there.
That's right.
Alrighty, everybody, we will be back next Friday, same time, same place. So you can always DM us your questions ahead of time. You can fill them out on the form. You can call the hotline and leave them there, and we will get to them. It's great seeing everybody every week, and we will see you next Friday.
Absolutely. See y'all. Stay
See ya.
safe.